It's a pleasure to have such a great crowd for the inaugural National Adaptation Forum webinar. This is a series to support continued adaptation community information exchange following on from the National Adaptation Forum in April in Denver, and before the next convening happens at the regional or the national level. EcoAdapt plans to facilitate these webinars on a quarterly basis. So if you have any suggestions for a topic or a presenter, send them our way, especially if you want to volunteer yourself. I want to give you a quick update on plans for the 2015 National Adaptation Forum. We're currently negotiating a venue, but there is a steering committee already collaborating to bring you another great forum in late spring or early summer 2015. But now on to today's webinar. EcoAdapt is thrilled to be partnering with the Georgetown Climate Center on this webinar. The topic or focus for today's webinar is on creating and expanding funding streams for adaptation planning and implementation. And we'll be talking about not exclusively that, but that will be woven into the various things that we'll be discussing. Our goal today is to have the presenters share some information about what adaptation activities they've been up to, and then allow time for everyone else who's here, it looks like 100 of us, to ask questions of the presenters to help them apply the ideas shared to their work more effectively, as well as to share their own ideas to improve the work of the presenters, building more adaptation goodness everywhere, or preparing today for a better tomorrow. So now on to a presentation. As Alex mentioned earlier, in April at the National Adaptation Forum, we released the State of Adaptation in the United States, which was a report commissioned by the MacArthur Foundation to help them frame what they might do in the world of adaptation, but also to provide some information to others. It examined trends in adaptation in 4 areas. In policy, the Georgetown Climate Center led that effort. Around agriculture, led by the University of California, Davis. The built environment, led by the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington, and on natural resources, led by EcoAdapt. The 4 groups all actually worked together, though, across these topics to try and look at where the interactions were, as well as the different pieces of information that each one of us knew about. So across all those sectors, one of the things we wanted to know was where was the most activity taking place. And so we did an assessment based on what we knew and what we found over the course of researching the report about where the majority of activity was. The most activity is in the area of impacts assessment, which shouldn't be surprising to any of you. And then there was moderate activity under planning, creation of resources and tools, and vulnerability assessments. There was less activity in capacity building and implementation, and virtually no activity in monitoring and evaluation. That limiting step to implementation in many ways gets to the issue of funding that we're talking about today, because frequently that was seen as a stumbling block for why people couldn't get there. But hopefully some of what we're going to share today is around how you can use what you already have to maybe be doing more than you thought you could. So in the policy arena here, just some of the examples of the things that are going on from the federal and tribal level to the state and finally to the local level, where different groups with or without regulatory mandate are taking on applying climate change into their work. In the agricultural world, there was definitely the least going on of all the sectors that we looked at. USDA cooperative extension had not yet been allied with the new USDA hubs at that point. But there was activity in some of the regions. The USDA does have a climate science plan. There are programs like WEEP and other smaller programs in regions, including the state of California, which as part of their adaptation plan has an agricultural component. In the built environment, there is guidance available. There's also different regions that are creating vulnerability assessments to plan for specific things. Obviously, one of the front runners in those efforts was King County up near Seattle. But you can find things around the country, including EPA's Climate Ready Water Utilities Program, and planning that's been going around involving transportation, especially on the Gulf Coast. In the natural resource world, there's probably the most that has been going on. A lot of the natural resource work started quite early, especially with coral reefs in U.S. waters. But it is now expanded to include all of the Department of Interior and all of the USDA holdings, including the Forest Service, and then a lot of work in the coastal regions. Gaps and opportunities that were identified for the report were supporting implementation of strategies. Again, that comes into a lot of the funding aspect. How do people find funding? How do people acquire funding? The need for funding, the need for better identifying how to use the funding you have. There was a need for building capacity for action. People understand how to do a vulnerability assessment for the most part, but they don't always understand how to actually implement them. Increasing cross-sectoral connections, even amongst the 4 sectors that this report looked at, there weren't a lot of examples of places where that cross-sectoral activity took place. More need for building public awareness and buy-in so that people recognize that adaptation benefited their inherent interests. And obviously, based on that white circle at the beginning that showed virtually no activity, improving monitoring and evaluation so we know what's actually working in terms of adaptation, what is a good investment, and what should we be doing more of, and what should we be doing less of. We had 8 recommendations that came out of this report. The first was to convene the community, and that was actually manifest as the inaugural National Adaptation Forum. The second was make finding information and support easy. The third was to support the community, and one of the things that the MacArthur Foundation has taken on to do that was the creation of the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. The fourth was to take stock of existing guidance. There's a lot of guidance out there. How do we make it so that people can find and use what exists? Adaptation marketing campaign that gets at that awareness thing. Kickstarting implementation. What are ways that you can get people to implement sooner? Identifying pathways for success, which gets to those monitoring and evaluation approaches, and moving climate beyond an environmental issue so that it becomes an issue that is relevant to everyone and everything that people do. Many of the examples and case studies that are in the report are on CAKE, the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange. And one of the nice things about all of the case studies that are on CAKE is that the majority of them have information about how their projects were funded, so that you can use that information to see if it applies to what you're doing. If anyone on this call isn't already a member of CAKE, I urge you to register and join. You get email updates that will tell you when there's new relevant material. You can also sign up to get updates on specific content areas. So if you have questions about anything that I've talked about, please feel free to contact me. Our next speaker is Sarah from the Georgetown Climate Center, and she'll be going more in depth onto these issues of funding and what are the other ways you pay for adaptation, hence the beyond. Sarah, I believe you should now have control.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me here today. I'm excited to share some of our new work with all of you and to talk about a few examples of how communities around the country are finding ways to pay for adaptation with federal funds or other sources. I want to kind of start off with a quick reference to how we got started looking at funding. When we work with and we talk to our collaborators around the country, our state and local policymakers, we hear lots of things about challenges they've got in trying to implement adaptation policies. So in my area of work, which is primarily urban heat adaptation, there really seem to be 2 major challenges. And the first of those is information. So at the Climate Center, we decided that it would be useful to create a toolkit that addresses some of the long-term solutions to keep cities cooler. Because what everybody needs is another toolkit, right? So we focused on 4 main strategies. From the top left, we focused on green roofs, cool roofs, urban forestry, and cool pavements. And under cool pavements, we talked about both light-colored pavements and permeable. And we kind of wanted to try to do a few things with this toolkit. The first was to try to capture all of the legal tools that local governments can use to encourage or require use of all 4 of these strategies. 2, to give local governments criteria to choose among these tools and among the 4 strategies based on their own particular blend of sort of unique local situation, priorities, legal authority, etc. And 3, to give examples of how other local governments had perhaps done some of this already. So this would fall under Laura's category 3 in terms of making information and support easier to find and to use. We've also been giving some technical assistance to local governments that want to figure out specifically for them which strategies are going to work, both practically and with their own legal authority. But that still leaves a pretty big challenge, which is how to pay for it, right? So we decided to take a look at federal funding streams that governments already receive year to year for purposes like transportation, community development, energy, public health, stuff like that, to see whether there's flexibility within some of those programs, statutes, regulations, and guidance to cover both sort of the core objectives of those programs and to incorporate adaptive actions and principles as well. The result of all of that research is our brand new federal funding compendium, which includes 44 different federal programs that we believe can cover urban heat adaptation activities. So what is in it? So we have broken down these 44 programs into 5 main categories. First of which is energy. Includes programs such as Weatherization Assistance Program, LIHEAP, and the state energy programs, among others. Second is community development, which includes the whole group of community development block grants and a whole suite of HUD programs and a few from Department of Commerce as well. Third, transportation, including everything from little programs like the Transportation Alternatives Program and possibly up to some of the really, really big highway transportation programs like the National Highway System and the National Highway Performance Program. Talking about some pretty serious things. Fourth is public health, including the Community Transformation Grants from HHS. And last but not least is environment, including non-point source management grants, urban and community forestry programs in the Forest Service, and others. So for each of these 44 programs, we've gathered what we think are the most salient and useful information for local governments to try to figure out which programs they might be able to use more adaptively. So what is included? For each program, we've got that information in basically 4 categories. First, who can use the funds? Who are the eligible applicants from state, local, and sometimes tribal governments, sometimes even nonprofit partners? Second, what kinds of activities can the funds pay for? Mostly we focused on things that can cover the 4 strategies I talked about, green roofs, etc. But sometimes these funds can be used also for planning, research, and training, which are useful corollaries. Third, what do we think the nexus is between the program's core objectives and urban heat adaptation? So where do we think there's sort of enough overlap that you might be able to use these funds a little bit differently than you've used them in the past and get some adaptation out of it? And last, sort of the nitty-gritty. What's the size of the whole pot for a particular program? What's the average size of a grant for the program? And to the extent the information is available, what kind of range of grants does there tend to be? Now, I know this is all a little bit abstract, so let me walk you through one quick example to make this a little bit more specific. So we're going to look at weatherization.
Sarah, can I interrupt for one moment?
Yeah, please.
Apparently, there is a lot of background noise that's happening, and we can't figure out where it's coming from. Theoretically, everyone is muted, but if anyone is perhaps working from their kitchen, can you mute yourself on your end?
Like.
That would be very much appreciated.
Thanks, Laura. I heard it too. I thought it was just me.
Carry on.
Thank you, ma'am. So I'm going to walk you through one quick example, which is Weatherization Assistance Program under Department of Energy. So who can use the funds? Question number 1. They flow through the states to local government agencies, for example, Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. What can you use the funds for just to start with? So these particular funds are designed to improve energy efficiency in homes for elderly and low-income residents by weatherizing homes. And although the program is traditionally focused on weatherizing for cold weather, there's no reason it has to. And in fact, in many places it can be used for weatherizing for warm weather also, which lines up nicely for us in terms of being able to put cool roofs on homes. A few recent changes in the list of recommended measures under the program that come down from DOE have resulted in, I think, probably an increased ability to include cool roofs on homes now. And we are excited to see what happens with that. So how much money? Well, so this is the tricky one. Weatherization assistance has taken a bit of a hit the past couple of years in Congress. But states get allocations between about $100,000 and $15 million per year. So in some states, this may actually be a pretty good source of funds, and about $70 million total allocated each of the past 2 fiscal years. And I should mention, before I move on to examples, that we really tried to stick with programs for the compendium that are funded relatively stably over the years. The sort of one-time, one-off grant programs that come up here and there, we did not focus on because we felt like these sort of consistent programmatic funding sources would be much more useful for long-term planning purposes. So Philadelphia has been doing some really cool stuff. They sponsored something called the Coolest Block Contest in cooperation with Dow, actually. And Wolf Street is the block that won. So they used Weatherization Assistance Program funds to put cool roofs on the entire block. And interestingly, going forward, so they're now monitoring both energy use in the buildings over time to see what kind of savings come from not only weatherizing, or I'm sorry, not only putting cool roofs on, one house here and there, but what the cumulative effect is of doing the whole block at once, whether it's greater than one would expect from just doing one. But they're also working with NASA to measure the impact on the heat island just outside the buildings over time, and see also whether this sort of coordinated approach adds up to a greater reduction than just doing sort of a house here and a house there. We're pretty excited to see how that comes out. So I want to talk quickly also about some of the limitations of this approach. So one, obviously, I don't need to go into a rant about Congress, but let's just say that funding is much less predictable for a lot of these programs than it used to be. I think that a lot of these programs are going to continue to be funded pretty significantly over time, but local governments need other options. So we also have been looking around for interesting ideas in terms of how to pay for adaptation outside of the context of federal funds. And Chicago, last month, leaders there are starting to build on the legacy of all their green roofs and green alleys by focusing on green infrastructure to reduce flooding throughout the city in homes and in streets. So last month, Mayor Emanuel committed $50 million in water infrastructure funding over the next 5 years to pay for building green infrastructure projects throughout the city, including permeable pavement, tree planting, bioswales, all kinds of stuff. Interestingly, part of those funds are also going to be used to study the impacts of climate change on rainfall patterns in the city so that they can try to sort of predict what the capacity is going to be, and to measure the costs and benefits of green infrastructure as a solution. Similarly, New York City, under Plan YC, has established something called the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation to finance energy efficiency and clean heat projects in all 5 boroughs. They're focusing only on retrofits, so only existing buildings, and primarily those over 50,000 square feet and not owned by city, state, or federal government. So they're really trying to target private buildings and retrofits to kind of try to spread energy efficiency through those. The money came initially from Recovery Act funds, but has gotten a lot of support from private foundations as well. And they are moving forward with providing capital for dozens of projects and really trying to get that moving throughout the city. In Washington, D.C., where I am at the moment, D.C. is really trying to increase the square footage of green roofs in the district, both to deal with the heat island problem and to deal with the city's combined sewer problem and increases in intense rainstorms here in the district that are predicted for us. So all DC businesses that sell food or alcohol have to charge 5 cents for every disposable paper or plastic bag, and the store gets to keep 1 or 2 cents depending on whether they offer sale of a reusable bag also. And the rest goes into something called the Anacostia River Cleanup and Protection Fund, which is used for river cleanup, education, and something called River Smart Homes, which helps to fund green roofs, rain gardens, and porous pavement. That has been pretty successful as well. And last, but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about how some of these measures, if you can find the upfront money to do them in the first place, will pay for themselves over time. So in Tucson, they installed a cool roof on this Thomas O. Price Center, which is a municipal service center. It's got the DMV and some other things in it. It cost about $25,000 for a 28 square foot cool roof, and it's been saving them about $4,000 a year in energy costs. So they expect to recoup the cost in 5 or 6 years. And interestingly, now they're going back and integrating solar. So I wanted to just kind of point out that a lot of these things are also compatible with renewables, and they're presumably going to save more money over time. So the compendium is now available in pre-publication draft. It is up on EcoAdapt's site for this webinar and will shortly be up on the Climate Center's website in our Adaptation Clearinghouse, which has lots of good things for state and local policymakers on adaptation. So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to hear what Cleveland is up to, and I'm happy to answer any questions when we're done.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute myself. Thank you, Sarah. Now we're going to move on to our third and final presenter. Janita comes to us from the city of Cleveland, where Alex and I were lucky enough to get to go earlier this year and check out some of what they're doing. So hopefully, Janita, do you have control of the mouse now? Aha, you do, but you are muted. Do you have control of the mouse and a voice?
Can you hear me?
Indeed, we can.
Wonderful. I'm not sure if I have control of the mouse just yet. Oh, apparently I do because I accidentally advanced the slide. Okay, I think we're good. Well, thank you very much. I'm really excited to be presenting on this webinar today on such an important topic. My name is Janita McGowan. I'm the Chief of Sustainability for the City of Cleveland. We've had an Office of Sustainability since 2005, and we develop programs and policies to green municipal operations, but we also work broadly in the community with the private sector, with residents, nonprofits, institutions, et cetera, also to create a sustainability city, really in the broadest sense of the word. This summer, we launched our Cleveland Climate Action Plan. So in 2012, we worked to create a municipal sustainability plan with greenhouse gas reduction goals, which includes everything from our airport to our water system to our public power company. And then in 2013, we worked on a community climate action plan that has a lot of goals, including economic growth, making the city resilient and attractive to businesses and employees. The whole process of creating the plan was designed to create some shared leadership and accountability. We also looked at business opportunities in that. And then, oh, I have the same bullet points 3 times. Well, the others are, of course, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to engage people, and to save money. I'll need to redo that slide someday. We also wanted to create a climate action plan that was in line with our Sustainable Cleveland 2019 initiative. That's a 10-year initiative started in 2009 that has the goal of building a green city on a blue lake by the year 2019, which is the 50th year anniversary of the last time the Cuyahoga River caught fire. And in 1969, we made the cover of Time magazine for that. And really the purpose is to impart a sense of urgency on our sustainability initiatives, but also to really tell our own story about the progress we've made since then. Often we get a 10-year anniversary story from national media, so we look at 2019 as a deadline to have our act together and to surprise and amaze the world with our transformation. So each year we have a theme for sustainability. You'll see from this graphic, this is the year of advanced and renewable energy. Next year will be the year of zero waste. And we use this as a public engagement tool, the celebration years, and also as a way to really advance by topic and provide some momentum to all the things we think need to happen in terms of climate action and sustainability in general. So we worked with about 50 different organizations to create this climate action plan, from utilities to district energy providers to our largest steel manufacturing company, to nonprofits, to parks, etc. I'm sure many of you don't know these organizations because they're local, but we really tried to engage the whole system that we're trying to change on our climate action planning process. Of course, the first thing we did was we had to figure out what our footprint was. We're about 12 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent a year annually. This is our total emissions by source. So you can see that a lot of it is coming from blast furnace gas, process emissions, electricity, but also from the building sector there in the green and yellow tones. If you look at our emissions by sector, again, 36% is industrial emissions, 25% is from industrial buildings, and then we look at residential and commercial buildings are our biggest chunk. So looking at climate action in a steelmaking town is probably a different endeavor than other towns that are focused more on, you know, other kinds of manufacturing or really service industries. So to do this climate action plan really meant a lot for us here in Cleveland, because I think our challenges might be different when it comes to mitigation than other places. And of course, we have our goals. Our overarching goal is an 80% reduction by 2050, and our incremental goal that we're focused on right now is 16% by 2020 with a 2010 baseline. And we look at this in 6 areas of action that we can take: energy efficiency and green building, advanced and renewable energy, sustainable transportation, waste reduction and resource conservation, land use and clean water, and community engagement and public health. We've identified a total of 33 actions in each of those 6 areas, and we list whether there are things you can do at home, at work, and in your community. Now, our climate action plan looks at both mitigation and adaptation and actions that really hit both. And we use this as an opportunity to really educate people on the need to do both and which ones really affect both, affect mitigation or adaptation or both. And so we use diagrams like this to show overlap and the importance of both planning for mitigation and adaptation. So for each, so during the process, we really looked, we started to look at the effects of climate change in Cleveland, and there's been some good research done in other Midwestern and Great Lakes states that really help us understand the effect. I think Cleveland is in the place of a lot of cities where we know we're going to need to adapt. We're starting to understand the risks and opportunities and challenges in this, but we're not very far along on that journey. I would say that it seems like New York and Chicago and some places on the West Coast are a lot further along than we are in this, but I think Cleveland is representative of a lot of other cities that are sort of just starting this journey. We know that we're predicting more extreme heat days, more intense storms and flooding, but probably also more droughts, increased urban heat island effects in our cities, lower water levels in Lake Erie, warmer winters, less ice on the lake, which is a really big issue for us. There's more evaporation in the lake when there's less ice. It reached record lows in 2012. So we think of ourselves as a freshwater-rich region. However, we also are looking at a future of lower lake levels, which affects water quality. It affects the cost of our city water department to treat water to be drinkable. It also affects our fishing industry and our shipping industry, and it encourages it makes eutrophication even more of a problem in the lake. We are in a non-attainment area for combined sewer overflow. We have a consent decree right now, so looking at not only are we trying to reduce flooding, are we planning ahead for future flooding levels as well? And of course, we know all of these things have increased risks to vulnerable populations and increased demand for public health services and probably also public safety services. So looking at how do we plan ahead for that in a city that has a high poverty rate, high numbers of youth and high numbers of elderly people. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for us in the future. So 2012 was the hottest year on record for the city of Cleveland, and it all attainment over the years. It's an important thing for us to understand how to consider and how to adapt to. Of course, we all know this about the urban heat island effect. The county has done a tree canopy assessment to really look at low tree coverage and where our most vulnerable areas are in terms of low tree canopy. And we also understand that our most paved areas, our least pervious areas, are the places where they'll be the hottest. There's some great research being done by the University of Michigan on climate change and health in terms of residential energy efficiency for comfort and equity. This study is really looking at the opportunity of weatherization to reduce negative health effects of hot weather. And University of Michigan is doing this work in Detroit, Cleveland, and DC. They're going to update existing maps of vulnerability, and they're going to model future climate scenarios, and then share this research with key stakeholders. We're really happy they're doing this work in the city of Cleveland. This is a draft map that looks at 3 factors: seniors over 65 and living alone, distance to water and the prevalence of respiratory illnesses, and then where minorities live with low levels of education, high levels of poverty, and high levels of impervious surfaces. They've mapped this. You can see on the east side of Cleveland, we have really the highest array or the highest prevalence of those factors as we start to layer them. My goal is to also layer this with the tree canopy information we're also getting to really understand where our opportunities in the city are to really just plant more trees to help with this. And then they've looked, they've done it on a census block level so we can really start to understand the top areas for intervention. Now they're looking at energy efficiency retrofits as part of this, so we can take this information really to understand, where our cooling centers are. Do we need to locate them closer? Are these places where we can robocall on high heat days to seniors, et cetera? And so this is very valuable information for us. And these are the variables that they're looking for when they do these assessments as well, that will help them understand opportunities for intervention around efficiency per house. So for each action in our climate action plan, you'll see here we have these symbols that mean this is something for at home, at work, and in the community, and whether it's adaptation or mitigation, and then the potential annual reduction in CO2 equivalents per year. This is one example of one action, action number 3, about incentivizing new construction to exceed existing building codes. And then for each action, we have an incremental next step by 2016, because this is the plan that goes to 2030, and we have committed to update our greenhouse gas footprint, our emissions footprint, by 2016. And so we're hoping if we can accomplish these next steps, then we'll see our reduction in 2016. So I'm not going to go through all of these because I understand that this presentation will be available to all of you, but we have identified which of these actions are also adaptation. So some of them are about programs and policies for retrofit, some are about incentivizing to exceed building codes. In renewable energy, we're looking at distributed energy installations. One of the things we're doing this summer, or this year, is assessing all of the vacant land in Cleveland for its renewable energy potential, and also looking at vacant land that is adjacent to large industrial users. In mobility, we're looking at implementing our Complete and Green Streets policy, which looks at green infrastructure in the right-of-way, as well as other greening things to do that both mitigate stormwater issues as well as tree canopy. So we're excited about that. I would say that in terms of funding, we have a regional sewer district that was just starting to collect a stormwater fee, which has been deemed unconstitutional in Ohio. It's probably going to go to the state Supreme Court. So right now we have no funding source that's coming in to mitigate stormwater issues, which is a continuing challenge. But in the city, we've integrated this into our capital planning process because there's no special source, so we're just trying to make this business as usual here. I think we could accelerate progress with some additional sources. Waste reduction and recycling, we really haven't, there's no real adaptation here, but we're doing it. And then land use and clean water, every action is really adaptation, and this looks at zoning codes, right-sizing infrastructure, again, the urban tree plan, scaling up local food infrastructure for stormwater, and conservation and efficiency around water. And then lastly, community engagement and public health. Action 32 I'm going to get into a little bit more detail, but not too far in, keeping an eye on the clock here. And then Action 33 is one of our key next steps, really conducting a vulnerability assessment with multiple stakeholders in the room from the city, the county, and likely the state. And then looking at integrating the impacts into existing emergency operations plans and hazard plans in the city and the region. This is basically what I just said, so we're going to skip this slide, and I'm going to talk about one of the ways that we're doing this work is a neighborhood climate action toolkit to help residents work on adaptation and mitigation really in their own neighborhoods and backyards. So we piloted this with 3 neighborhoods in Cleveland this summer. And for each neighborhood, we did a snapshot of the number of households, people, jobs, the percentage of the population, and we did a neighborhood carbon footprint for each neighborhood to understand how much they're emitting just in their small section of the city of Cleveland. So here's that same footprint for another area in the Kinsman neighborhood. We use an asset-based approach to help the neighborhoods learn about climate science and climate change, identify their assets and their concerns. So what are they doing already in sustainability, and what is it that they're concerned about that climate action could also help to develop local project ideas, to understand how to get outside support, and then to implement the projects, and then share and learn them at our annual sustainability summits we have. We've had 5 every year, and we'll have 5 more to 2019. So we have created an online toolkit that we hope to use with various neighborhood groups and CDCs and interested residents that want to take this on. There's 4 steps. Learn about the plan, identify your assets and concerns, develop the project idea, and develop a project proposal. And you'll see on the right column a list of the tools for each of those 4 steps. We know that emissions vary by place in the city, and so different neighborhoods will have different strategies to help them. And what we've done is, again, I said we did the neighborhood carbon footprints per neighborhood, compared them to the citywide emissions as a whole, and that's on a per capita basis. We've created a neighborhood calculator, so each neighborhood could very easily go in and put a few pieces of data. This is basically taking our citywide footprint, making some assumptions, and using readily available data from like community, the American Community Survey or the census or other data that's readily available, put that in and get the footprint for their neighborhood. And so we can see that in these certain neighborhoods that we're working in, they're using more public transit than other neighborhoods and things like that through that calculator. And then we also created a neighborhood climate action calculator. So as they're coming up with their plans, they can also understand how effective it will be in helping us reach our goals as a larger city. So they can very easily say, you know, in my neighborhood, we're going to retrofit 10 buildings, plant a garden, reduce waste by so much, do these programming. This is its effect. in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then our hope is to tie this program into our Cleveland Carbon Fund as a way to fund these neighborhood projects. You can find out more about our climate action plan and our toolkit on our website. I just kind of gave you a brief brush. Really, our next steps are going to be to create some similar engagement strategies, well, very different engagement strategies for the commercial industrial sector in Cleveland, because it's going to take a lot of people doing a lot of work to do this. But we did want to start out with the residents. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to hand it back over to the organizers now.
Hi, thank you very much, Janita. We have a couple of questions that people have already sent in. One question was about whether or not the slides and recording would be circulated afterwards. Yes, we will be posting a recording of the presentation on the website for the webinar. So I'm going to ask a few of the questions that have been sent in. The first one is from Jessica Whitehead of Sea Grant, and this is a question for you, Sarah, I believe. The examples we've seen, and Janita, you may have some thoughts on this for the greater Cleveland area, because I know there's a funny county city setup around Cleveland. The examples that were shown so far today are primarily from large cities. What resources are available for rural communities and small cities and towns?
That's a great question. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I have to apologize because part of that is my own bias. Working on a primarily urban issue, I do spend most of my time looking at large cities. So that is an unconscious but probably annoying to small cities and rural communities bias. I apologize. But I do think that there are a fair number of funding streams in this compendium that really could be used by anybody, small cities in particular, but some rural areas too. I think some of the transportation funds that tend to be spent all over the place, certainly. Maybe some of the community forestry and open space programs under Department of Agriculture, some of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund money. I think it certainly has potential to be used outside of the large urban context pretty effectively, I would think.
Hi, this is Janita. We've used some sources of funding that I think are relevant to small cities. One particular to the Great Lakes region is Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding from the EPA that's helped with trees and green infrastructure. U.S. Forestry will have grants around biodiversity and tree canopy, forest restoration. And then we have been funded by the USDA, which I think is unusual for urban areas because we have so much vacant land and urban agriculture happening. And so the USDA, I think, would be a good source as well for certain things around adaptation.
Great. Okay, Janita, this is a question for you from Jack Liebster from Marin County, I believe. You showed an impressive array of partners. What will they substantively contribute, and how did you break down turf to get meaningful cooperation?
Sure. Well, I would add a little context to that. We've been having annual sustainability summits since 2009, where we have strategically engaged attendees and participants from multiple sectors for 5 years. There's about 500 people a year who attend. So this climate action planning process came out of 5 years of those summits. We had our first meeting around actual implementation 3 weeks ago, where we started to create a work plan for this and identified key next steps for 2014. I think because we spent a year creating this plan, there's a sense that we're all in this together. There's not a lot of turf wars. In fact, there's really a lot of ownership of things that are in line with those organizations, either priorities or missions, that they will take on and be leaders in and kind of contribute to this larger work. I will say that we started to collect energy efficiency goals or carbon reduction goals from different institutions and businesses to start to understand and track their progress on their own internal goals and how that will feed into the larger plan. And so that's been one of our key next steps in engaging those stakeholders and encouraging the ones without goals to maybe create them. And we're kind of building this airplane while we're taking off. But it's been fairly positive. I will say the plan is for City of Cleveland proper, which is what our jurisdiction is, but we understand already that it's starting to influence how the region is thinking about this. And there's a lot of key takeaways from our plan that other regional stakeholders, smaller cities around the county and region could use to help advance this work.
Thanks. Question from Tanya Graham at the GEOS Institute. Can we address the funding realities of this Congress? This is a question for you, Sarah, and how we might work collectively to address that. Given that members of the House are crossing out every budget line item they can find that says climate on it, it seems that a coordinated response within the adaptation sector is needed just to maintain the existing federal funding. So I guess you get to have that diatribe after all about Congress.
I guess I should have done that rant about Congress after all. I shouldn't have restrained myself. That's a fantastic question, and I completely agree. I think the adaptation community generally needs to get our act together and be a little bit more coordinated in asking for the things that we think are important. In terms of what the best way is to do that, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that. I'm not a lobbyist, and we're not an advocacy organization, but I would say ASAP that Laura mentioned earlier might be a really good vehicle for that. Laura and Janita, if you guys have better ideas than I do, feel free.
I don't have any big ideas on how to fix Congress.
Yeah.
I think on a local scale, you know, sometimes we just don't use the word climate. We talk about the other co-benefits, like risk management and things like that. I mean, there's other nomenclature to use that will get to climate. It's unfortunate, I feel like we can't talk about it explicitly sometimes, but there are other nomenclature to use to get to the same results, because most people will agree on those things when they think about preventing floods and preparing for droughts and increasing quality of life and economic resilience. You don't get a lot of pushback on those words.
Well, and what I would like to throw out there is that there was a Stanford University poll that was released yesterday that actually showed that the lowest level of agreement that climate change is real and it is caused by anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions was actually, for any state, was Utah at 65%, and all of the other states had higher polling of acknowledgement that it really is a problem. So I think that that challenge is actually much less at the local level. I think it's become a dogmatic issue at the congressional level that is not reflective of society's understanding of it, because I think, like Janita said, people understand the impacts that they see in their daily lives. Which leads us to Matt Chadse's question, and I apologize, Matt, if I mispronounced your last name, about what is the experience in Cleveland with climate deniers and industrial customers?
Sorry, climate deniers and what?
Industrial customers.
You know, there are climate deniers everywhere you go. We've decided that we're not going to waste a lot of time trying to change people's minds when their minds aren't swayed by good science. If it's an ideological thing, there's probably not going to convince them. Most of the people here aren't climate deniers, like as she just stated, that study. In terms of our industrial emitters, they're on their sustainability journey too, and they're trying to be good corporate citizens. One thing we've discussed is that, you know, although we're counting this as our carbon footprint, you know, the goods they're producing are going all over the globe. So, you know, reducing global demand for steel is not part of our climate action plan, and these are large employers here. But what can we do to help them garner resources and to make energy efficiency a priority, to make cogeneration a priority, and to shine a light on what they're already doing that's working well. We haven't had a lot of negativity from the industrial sector, primarily because we involve them in the creation of this plan. And I would say that our small to medium-sized manufacturers are very much on board with reducing emissions as it relates to cost savings and energy efficiency, because their profit margins tend to be much smaller, and they're very much willing to and excited about programs that we have that use utility rebates to help them with audits and retrofits. So not a lot of pushback, but part of that's in the framing and part of that's in the engagement.
Okay, two quick questions for Sarah, both about your compendium. Leanne Nurse from EPA wants to know if the compendium is available online, and Pam DeBona from the state of Massachusetts wants to know if, in addition to built environment examples, do you also have funding sources that focus on natural resources?
Oh, both good questions. Answer the first question is yes. In fact, a pre-publication draft of it, which means that it's done except we haven't made it pretty yet, is available on the webinar website, on EcoAdapt's website. It is so brand new, hot off the presses, that it's actually not up on the Climate Center's website yet, although it has to be hopefully tomorrow. But thank you to Alex and Laura for getting it up on the webinar website. With regard to the second question about natural resources, my answer is not yet. This is our first foray into funding, and this is as far as we've gotten so far. I hope that we will be able to cover more sectors next, but we're still kind of trying to make some plans.
And as I hinted, if you go into the CAKE database and look up some case studies, you can find out some evidence of how people got funding to do natural resource work, if that's what you're looking for. Okay, next question. Amanda Brennan from the University of South Carolina. This is for Janita. Does your climate action plan include outreach and input from disadvantaged communities and communities of color to address equity issues?
Yes, so we worked to develop this with Environmental Health Watch, which is an environmental social justice organization that works at the neighborhood level. I think some of the equity issues are going to be around adaptation planning, so those maps that showed high heat, how it affects vulnerable populations. So we're looking at equitable distribution of assets and risks when it comes to sustainability, and trying to kind of bring all neighborhoods up to par in terms of quality of life. We think that sustainability and climate planning is uniquely positioned to kind of do that kind of restorative environmental justice work. So that is baked in, I think, to the planning process and intentions of this. I think the neighborhood toolkit is also part of that. So looking, it's really bottom-up climate action planning. So we could swoop into a neighborhood and say, you just need to do these 5 things to make your neighborhood a climate-friendly neighborhood. But the whole point of the toolkit is that we might not have the answers that are the best fit for the neighborhoods, both their assets and their concerns. And there might be some things that they can do that are climate action that increase public safety or public health that only they know about because they live there. And so we think that level of engagement and sort of granularity and engagement is going to be really helpful in rolling this out. The city of Cleveland is the second fourth big city in the U.S., so I think it would be remiss of us to develop a climate action plan that didn't look at populations that are vulnerable, minority, suffering from public health issues.
Great. And I just want to follow up on that. Did the city of Cleveland do a vulnerability assessment as part of how they identified what those action plans for communities or for neighborhoods would be?
No, we did not. And the action plans are created by the neighborhoods, so those aren't made yet. There's only 3 that were pilot neighborhoods this summer.
Okay.
But our next step is a vulnerability assessment. And we're not quite sure how we're going to fund it yet, but we know we need to do it.
Okay. You and I should chat more about that. I have some ideas for you. Ryan Towell asks, can you share some initial ideas for how you engaged incentivized industry to reduce emissions and encourage adaptation? And you talked about this a little bit already, but do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Incentives are tough here. There aren't a lot of state incentives. There are some rebates that come out of our utilities based on Senate Bill 221 in the state of Ohio. I think the biggest program we have some for small and medium-sized businesses, we have some for residents, we have some for low-income residents. I think the biggest incentive is the payback in terms of energy efficiency for the industries to invest in efficiency and things like cogen, as I said before. It is a struggle. Some of these companies are global corporations, so they're not just looking at their footprint here. They may have global footprint goals. So they may see a reduction across their portfolio, but it might not affect Cleveland. These are things we're still figuring out, but we're glad they're around the table. And hopefully this plan is a way to kind of spark some action here in Cleveland.
Okay, thank you. It is 11 o'clock, and we have not gotten to everybody's questions. I apologize. If we did not get to your question, please use the email addresses that were sent around, or that are on the slide that you're looking at, rather, to direct your question directly to the speaker you wanted to get more information from. I thank the 115 people who were participating today, and I thank my fellow panelists who shared some great information about what they're up to. I also thank everyone who is working the back end of this webinar to make it actually happen. So this presentation will be posted on the webinar website. You should have all gotten a link to that already. If not, please email me or Alex at ecoadapt.org and we can direct you to it. We'll post it as soon as we can, and thank you all for joining us today. Alex, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to make to the group? Okay. Well, thank you all. Bye.